Nosferatu improved on a tired Dracula trope dating back 45 years. Robert Eggers' Nosferatu has ignited a fresh conversation about the vampire mythos, departing from the romanticized portrayals that have dominated cinema since the 1970s. Instead, Nosferatu is a stunning remake that puts the terror back into vampire lore. While classic adaptations like Dracula 1979 leaned into a tragic love story that helped to influence countless writers and directors, Eggers' film delves into the complicated reality of Count Orlok's coercion. With the help of Nosferatu's stellar cast performances, Eggers explores the complexities of Ellen's agency and the unsettling nature of their twisted connection. This reimagining of the vampire legend challenges audiences to confront the darker aspects of desire and the insidious nature of evil, offering a chilling and impactful cinematic experience in Nosferatu's shocking scenes. Dracula and Mina's relationship has been romanticized in movies since 1979. While the story of the German expressionist film Nosferatu has key differences from Dracula, it is still, as an unofficial adaptation at the time, inseparable from the original novel. Both texts have seen reinterpretations that add layers of sympathy to their malevolent count. Interestingly, two key examples of this were released in the same year: John Badham's Dracula, starring Frank Langella, and Werner Herzog's Nosferatu the Vampire, both screened in 1979. Dracula even had the tagline of a love story, while Herzog reinterprets Nosferatu the Vampire's Orlok to be a more tragic figure than in Max Schreck's original Nosferatu actor portrayal in 1922. Eggers made the right move by using Nosferatu counterculturally in a subgenre overwhelmed by the romanticization of vampires. These sympathetic layers added to Dracula's character have become interwoven with Dracula's lore over the years. Perhaps the best product of this is Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which takes the romance to a Shakespearean level of tragedy. However, when overdone, this reduces Mina, or Ellen, to a romantic object for both Dracula, Orlok, and Jonathan, Thomas. She deserves more than this, especially since, in the novel, she has control over the entire epistolary narrative. Eggers made the right move by using Nosferatu counterculturally in a subgenre overwhelmed by the romanticization of vampires since the work of Anne Rice. Nosferatu shows the reality of Count Orlok's coercion. Robert Eggers' Nosferatu portrays a complex relationship between Ellen and Count Orlok while showing the horrifying reality. Lily Rose Depp told IndieWire that in preparation for the role, Eggers gave her a book on demonic sexual awakening, which she used as her Bible on set. In interviews, Depp has consistently acknowledged that the movie is just as much a love story about Ellen and Orlok as it is about her devotion to Thomas. It is equally relevant that Eggers has Ellen calling out to anything in a moment of spiritual desperation, which gives Orlok access to her. Ellen also asks the professor whether evil comes from within or beyond, showing Orlok is a manifestation of true evil that the post-Enlightenment characters of the movie do not want to acknowledge. He is also a manifestation of her repressed desire. However, this alone is a reductive reading. Eggers makes the effort to strip the eroticism from Orlok's characterization, contributing to the horror of his connection to Ellen. His coercion, such as threatening her with the death of her loved ones if she does not submit, vitally complicates a wholly romantic reading. Her somnambulism and intense bodily hysteria, which could have socially ostracized her were it not for Anna's loyalty, are traits that can be exploited. This bleak display of coercion shows the harrowing reality of what being under Dracula's thrall really means. Orlok takes advantage of Ellen's vulnerability and uses her apparent specialness to groom her. Her somnambulism and intense bodily hysteria, which could have socially ostracized her were it not for Anna's loyalty, are traits that can be exploited. whereas the professor talks about her special nature in a positive way, saying she would have been priestess of Isis in heathen times. Orlok's acknowledgement of her uniqueness is portrayed in a comparatively unhealthy way. Eggers' Nosferatu gives Ellen her agency back in. With the horrifying aspects of Ellen and Orlok's connection in mind, it would be easy to paint Ellen as merely a victim of his machinations and a passive sacrifice in the story. However, Eggers does not fall into this trap either and instead opts to give Ellen her agency. The original screenplay, via Deadline, reveals even more of the complex feelings within Ellen. Ultimately, Ellen triumphs in the fight against Orlok by using her assumed submission to distract him until daylight. Ellen looks at him. She has a fiery reckoning in her eyes. She has won. Eggers also shows agency by having Ellen initiate her relationship with Orlok at the beginning. However, this is not designed to victimize, but to emphasize how Orlok preys on vulnerabilities. This is true to Dracula in Stoker's novel. For example, Dracula preys on Renfield by buying a property next to the mental hospital. He also finally has access to Mina, but only when the crew of Light unwisely leaves her alone. Simultaneously, Mina has power as a new woman of the Victorian era and as the compiler of the story. Eggers' Nosferatu movie honors these coexisting traits in Ellen. Nosferatu's complex romance is an improvement on past Dracula adaptations. The triumph of Robert Eggers' Nosferatu is in its refined complexities. This is one reason why Eggers adapted Nosferatu instead of merely Dracula. By doing so, he is able to take inspiration from Stoker while interweaving the fairy tale elements of Nosferatu, freeing it from its Victorian constraints to truly speak to the eternal, as well as Romanian folklore in Nosferatu. However, this does not discount the contextual details of Dracula and the 19th century, which only further reinforces the brilliance of centering Ellen in the story. This blend of influences makes for a vast improvement in the simplifications and misconceptions in Dracula's pop cultural lore. Nosferatu and Ellen's complex romance exists in an uncomfortable liminal space between predatory and liberating, which in itself is extremely gothic. Although Ellen is Count Orlok's prey, she has a sexual ambivalence about him that is certainly in the subtext of Stoker's Dracula, though arguably more expressed by Jonathan's diary and letters. Eggers also allows for other pieces of sexual uncertainty. For example, there is a moment when Ellen and Anna share a bed, which some viewers consider sexually charged. However, it also exists in the context of more typically intimate homosocial relationships of the period, as seen in other titles like Jane Eyre and Great Expectations. Eggers shows just enough for the audience to read it subtextually, which is a simmering underlying energy that permeates Nosferatu.